Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say carpe diem, go after the things that you want in life. Something that I wanted to do this year was rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, and this time talk about it with other people. Now, the way this all started was I began doing episode recaps, and then I started doing cast and crew interviews. I've got so many of those for you to check out. And then I thought, what would be a fun way to sort of expand the universe of this conversation about Halt and Catch Fire? And I thought it would be fun to talk with people who are subject matter experts, who know something about some aspect that's covered in this show, maybe create some new entry points for people who aren't familiar with the show, and give some information to some people who have seen the show before. So we're going to do one of these special bonus interviews today. And before I introduce my guest, just so you're aware, we're going to try to keep this one as spoiler free as possible in case there's some new people who discover the show through this interview. We want to give information about the subject matter, but not spoil any major details from the show. So I'm so excited to welcome today's guest, who is Dan Berman, who's the director of the Rhode Island Computer Museum, which lent a number of vintage computers to the show Halt and Catch Fire to use as props. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Melissa. I'm glad to talk to you, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation here about Halt and Catch Fire.
That's the hope, right? That's what we're here for. So tell us more about, well, first of all, your background and your role with the Rhode Island Computer Museum.
Well, I'm a civil engineer, retired civil engineer, and I worked 40 years for the United States government, US DOT. And my one of my big projects was the big dig up in Boston. So I was the first federal project manager. There were three project managers, a federal one, a state one, and a contractor one. And I was the federal one at that time. It was a massive project, but it was fun. And of course, we used many, many computers there in the early 90s. At that time, a bunch of us were car collectors, and we decided that, oh, maybe we should collect something smaller than cars. I know, let's collect computers. So we started the Rhode Island Computer Museum and started collecting computers. In 1999, we incorporated as a nonprofit. And once we incorporated, every university, every state agency, every government agency found us and started donating old computers to us. So now we have a warehouse, a 5,000 square foot warehouse filled with old computers, and we have a learning lab.
Okay. Well, okay, so that brings me to my next question, which is like, what's your broader mission now that you're a nonprofit? I imagine you have different programs that you run. What do you do day to day?
So thank you for asking about us. So our mission is to be a knowledge center to inspire young people for the future workforce. And we do that by saving old and new technology. So if you were to look at us on a daily basis, we have workshops and classes, and we work with an inner city school to teach the kids about computers, project management, all different aspects of computers and how to use them.
Okay, great information. How did the Rhode Island Computer Museum get connected with this show?
So that's a really interesting question. And we were, at the time, we were just collecting. And then when I retired from my government career, I said, well, let's start a learning lab where we can teach kids. And so this was about 10 years ago that we started the learning lab. And at that time, I got a call from somebody that said they were producing this new show. They had heard that we had supplied a prop for Mad Men. So we had supplied the first prop, which was an IBM 360 face panel to Mad Men. And in this industry, in the prop industry, it's all word of mouth. So one set designer tells another set designer. So I get this call from the set designer, and they said, do you have any Commodore 64s? Which is an old gaming computer from my daughter's early childhood area. And I said to them, sure, we have like 17 of them. How many do you want? And they said, all of them. And so I was kind of surprised, taken back. And I said, sure. And if you go to the first scene in the first episode of Halt and Catch Fire, you'll see all those Commodore 64s in the house. And that's how it started with that. So they put me in contact with Christopher C. Rogers. Now, it was interesting because Christopher's wife is from Barrington, Rhode Island. So they would come and visit here in Barrington, Rhode Island. So I became friends with Christopher, and he became friends of the Computer Museum. And so he actually came to the museum, saw all the equipment that we had. And I don't know if he actually wrote some of the equipment into the episodes or not, but we would get calls for the next 4 years about, oh, can I have this piece of equipment? Or we're going to be doing something on this. Can I use this piece of equipment? So it was a pretty nice relationship that we built with Christopher on the computer programs and what they were showing on Halt and Catch Fire.
So I was going to ask, who were you most closely working with on the show? Was it Christopher C. Rogers? Was it the folks from the props department? You know, who were your main points of contact?
Well, I would say it was both. I mean, Christopher C. Rogers was, they would visit, the family would visit, and when they had their first child here a few years back while the show was going on, they would come to Rhode Island. And so I would actually become friends with them, or became friends with them. And they would also put me in contact with the prop masters. And so most of the details were handled through the prop masters of the show, which changed. There were several different ones. And, but I also had the relationship with Christopher too.
Wonderful to hear. So, you know, we've given some general information about your work. Let me give a little bit of general information about the show as well to make sure everybody's on the same page here. So, Halt and Catch Fire, the show ran from 2014 to 2017 in its original airing. It tells the story of a team of main characters with different technical skills who are at the forefront of the major tech developments from 1983 to 1994, basically all within the computer industry. So it starts with the development of personal computers. We move on to things like community game and chat forums. We talk about antivirus software. We even get as far as the World Wide Web. So basically the things that we really did encounter in real time from 1983 to 1994, the show covers those developments. So, you know, for a period piece like this to work, obviously everything has to look like it comes from that period, which is why your museum and the props that you were bringing to the show were so important. So one question I'm thinking about, you know, sometimes in the show we see that specific machines were probably written into the script, like you were saying, Commodore computers feature heavily. Other times there was more latitude. Like there's a scene in season 1 very early where Joe McMillan has a number of different machines lined up in his apartment, and we're sort of scanning through them, and there was probably more options on the types of machines we would have seen then. So how much input did your museum have into computers that were used in the show, if there were ever moments where there was more latitude like that?
Well, both Christophers, the showrunners, are very knowledgeable about old computers, but they would continue to question me and asked us and our staff is, well, was this one around in 1994? Well, was this one around in this year? In the 80s. Well, what was being used then? Could this possibly have been used? And so we would give them some guidance on that. And other shows that we've done, we've given guidance on too. So for example, the latest ones that we're working with now are Severance and Fallout. So those are 2 new shows that are out that are still underway, and we work on those. But Christopher it was really important to them to be very precise about the timing and what was available. So you would see, for example, the 5 1/4 inch floppy disk, and you need to have 5 1/4 inch floppy disk players at the time, or disk drives for those. So he'd be very insistent about which ones we could use or should use on those, which modems, all the different things. And you could date check him on the backs of the equipment too.
Okay. How much lead time did you normally have to source a computer or a drive before an episode went into filming?
Well, that was a real wake up call for me. So, because, usually when we have computers or different things that we ship around or that we loan out, we have several months in advance. We know what we're doing. They're doing a show at Harvard and they want a special computer, and we work with them. In the film industry, that's a lot different. So, oh, we have plenty of time. We want it next week. And so you get these calls and they say, do you have this, this, and this? And I'd say, well, wait a minute, it's over at our warehouse, and nobody mans the warehouse. So I'd have to go over to the warehouse and look for it. And unfortunately, our database is not as good as I would like it to be. But when I'd find the piece, they say, oh, I found it. And he says, okay, can you ship it now? And so we had about a week or 2 weeks lead time on most of the stuff. Although Christopher did come in the summertime sometimes and said, oh, that looks pretty neat. Save that for us. And we would have something ready if they did call on the other times.
Okay.
And you rent, and of course you rent the weirdest things, or you loan out the weirdest things. For one of the episodes, they needed these heavy cables because in a computer room, you would have a raised floor. But if you were doing something that was not really an official computer room, you may have all those wires under the just across the floor. And some of these wires were like, 2 inches thick. They were huge cables, and they rented the cables from us because they wanted to show what it was like with these cables. So it was very detailed in some of that areas.
Mm. If there were ever specific machines that the show needed that you didn't have on site or in your warehouse, what kind of support were you able to provide in those situations?
That's a difficult question to ask. So, I mean, some of the machines are very unique, and we had most of the things. I think that we would try to put them in touch with other people that we know. But several of the museums will not rent out the stuff or loan out the stuff. So, for example, the Computer History Museum, which is the biggest one in the world, will not do that. All of them are collectible artifacts, and they don't want to loan them out. They will let them take pictures, and so they could take pictures of them to see what they were like, and then they could try to source them with the pictures. Or they could go to some of the other smaller museums that will loan the stuff out. But that was about how it works. Usually when something got really tough, they may have to change what they were thinking about and use something else in that area.
Hmm. So
And
the show was set again in the 80s and 90s. It aired in 2014 to 2017. Some of the brands that were featured still existed at the time when it aired. Some of them did not exist anymore. Quite a lot of them probably did not exist anymore. So, to what extent were there restrictions in using props from certain brands, or, were there brands that you all tended to use or tended to avoid because of that?
what happens with the computers is, yes, you're correct that you would need to pay royalties to some of the computer companies if you use those. That wasn't on my end. That was on Halt and Catch Fire's end. They would have to research that and look into that, which I think that they did. The one that comes to mind that we've had, we haven't had issues with, but they are very precise about it, is IBM. So, for example, we loaned out equipment. We loaned out things to Hidden Figures, which is another computer movie, and we had these binders. And there was these big binders that they walk around in Hidden Figures with that have the IBM it's written on IBM on the binder. Well, they didn't want to get in trouble, and they didn't want to have to pay IBM, so they blacked out the I on it. So so it just says BM on the folder there, and that's the type of thing that you see. So I think that Halt and Catch Fire may have actually blacked out some of the types of equipment on some of the ones that they loan. I have not looked at that detail, but that's probably what they did on some of those. Not for
Okay.
the not for the Commodores, though. I know that.
Okay. Fair enough. With Commodore, was it just paying royalties probably with something like that?
I would assume that it was something like paying royalties, or it was actually a good promo for Commodore, so they probably wanted it too.
Hmm. Okay. So from your standpoint, from what you could see, what were the biggest challenges the computers at the show needed that you remember being especially difficult to source, or ones that you had to really dig through your warehouse to find the right thing that they were looking for?
Um, Boy, it's been a while now, and we've gone through a lot more shows since that. So that's a little hard for me uh, to think about. But um, one of the things that you have to remember that the computers back then were not small; they were heavy. So one of the biggest issues is if they wanted a monitor, a big monitor like a Sun monitor or a Silicon Graphics computer, those things weigh 70 pounds. And just the logistics of getting them to the filming location sometimes is difficult. So you don't want, you want to ship the stuff, and sometimes the stuff gets broken. And so that's unfortunate. We like to make sure that we have two or three of something, and not ship our the one that we want to keep ourselves. So I think that's part of the area. Some of them were fairly big, and I think the size and the shipping that way is where you get yourself into some of the harder issues. Because we're an all volunteer organization, so we don't have the capability of putting them on pallets and racking them all up and then sending them out. They have to come with this with somebody to do that. And if it's filmed in New York City, they send up a truck usually and pick up the stuff. So that's easier for us that way.
Hmm. Yeah. So, but this one being shot in Atlanta, you didn't maybe have that much of an option with that when they had tight turnarounds.
Yeah, we had to send it down to them on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any computers or any devices or cables or any other things that you were especially excited that were featured on this show?
Well, I think just the sheer fact that we were on the show was probably the thing that made the most of us. They did have well, they actually did some shout outs to us too, and we can talk about those in a minute. Um, but I would say probably some of the IBM, the Silicon Graphics, obviously the Commodores, all of them were just so unique. And just talking to the people in the show was very good, and you got to be part of the show. So after a wrap on one of the seasons, they bought all the staff these bags, these backpacks, and they actually, I have mine here. They actually gave us one of the Halt and Catch Fire backpacks too.
Oh,
So
that's so
I
great.
don't know if you can see the Halt and Catch Fire on there, but
Yeah.
yeah, so that was kind of nice. So it made us feel part of the production when they did something like that.
Oh, that's so cool. You had just mentioned the shout outs, and you had sent me a couple of files earlier, and it's so fun. Tell us about what the show provided for you.
Well, as talking with Christopher, and Christopher has become a good friend of the museum, he talked about ways that he could help us. And he said that one of the things that we can do is we can do a little shout out. We can have some of our cast members do a shout out to the computer museum. And what a shout out is basically take your cell phone or an iPhone or something and take a picture of the stars, and they can talk about how they like the computer museum. So that's what they did with two of their stars from the show, and I thought that was great that they did them. And you'll get a chance to see the shout outs that they did. They're pretty funny for us, and we've continued that process. So we've asked other people in other shows to do shout outs, and so hopefully we'll get some new ones here in the future.
That's so great. So, for everybody who's watching this, there was a shout out from Carrie Bechet, and there was a shout out from Toby Huss, and I'm going to include those right here so that you can check those out yourself. And thanks so much, Dan, for sharing those with us.
Come learn coding at the Rhode Island Computer Museum. You can learn on the Raspberry Pi. It's an inexpensive yet groundbreaking single board computer. You can also find out what Arduinos means. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with robots. You can check out their vintage computers on Halt and Catch Fire, and they've got a lot of new stuff too. We love these guys.
Hey kids, next Saturday afternoon when your dad drives down to the town dump to drop off your old puppies that don't work anymore, have him stop by the Rhode Island Computer Museum. You can make yourself a robot there, or a robot, whatever you want to call them. They got all sorts of stuff there. They supply all the computers for this show called Halt and Catch Fire that you don't watch, and frankly, I don't watch either. But it's a nice show, and these guys are nice to give us these computers. You're gonna love it. You can go down and make yourself a giant robot that'll terrorize the neighborhood with some Raspberry Pi equipment they have down there. They have something called Aldrinos or whatever they have. You're gonna love it. It's better than going to the city dump.
Dan, so for you, what's coming up for the Rhode Island Computer Museum? What else is on the horizon for you, and how can we find you?
Well, thanks for asking, and I can give my shout out now to you. And so you can find us on the internet if you either go to Rhode Island if you Google Rhode Island Computer Museum, you'll find us. We come up. Or you can type in ricomputermuseum.org and we come up. And then you can go from there, you can go to our YouTube site, you can go to our Facebook site, you can go to our TikTok site or or Instagram or any of the other sites, and you can see what's coming up for the museum. We've been fairly active. We have this new program, which is called Green Power. And that's where we work with kids to build project-based learning electric cars. Now, these aren't just any electric cars. These are kit cars that come from England, hence our lineage of English British cars. And the kids build these cars, and then we race them. That you physically get in them and race them down in Ninigret Park, Rhode Island. We have a couple races a year. It's a mile-long track, and the schools get a big kick out of it. We have 11 schools so far. We're looking for more schools if other schools want to participate in that. We also continue our training program, and we're continuing with the movies. So this past year, Fallout was a big show. And in the 4th episode, you'll see some of our computers. They're WAN computers that we have. We also are participating with Severance, and they came to us a couple of years ago, and so we're anxiously awaiting the next episode of the next series of Severance. So we hope to get more and be involved with more. And if anybody comes to Rhode Island, please come visit us. We'd be happy to give you a tour and show you some of the activities and some of the computers that were in some of these different shows.
This is also great to hear. Is there anything else you wanted to share about your involvement with the show that maybe I didn't ask about, but you want to make sure we know?
Well, I think that, it's amazing to think how long ago that show was and how it's still very active and people are still very interested in it. And we made some really close friends with that show. And I've noticed in the industry that once you make these friends, they're friends for life, and it's a closed network of all the set designers. They say, well, don't tell anybody about our set designer. And then they tell everybody about their set designer. So it's, where they got their props from. So it's really fun to work with them, and hopefully we can do more in the future.
Thank you so much for everything that you've shared, for taking some time to tell us about your work on the show and your work with the show. It is so great to hear from you.
Thanks again, Melissa. Enjoy your day.
And to everybody who's watching this, go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.